Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what is whizzing around in front of me today is one of the officers from Anvil Industries' new dress uniform range, which they are kickstarting as Space British Empire, which always gives me a bit of a crack up, to be perfectly honest. The dress uniform range have been one of their most popular since it came out in cast resin, and you can still get that through their website, and you will be able to once the Kickstarter is finished as well. But if you've got a printer at home, like I have, and you want to knock out bunches of these guys, then do cruise along, check out the link in the description, because it is a ridiculous price for a huge amount of miniatures. Now this fella, he is actually he's labeled as a commissar, but I looked at the pose and the miniature itself, and I was kind of inspired by the old Mordian officer from the Imperial Guard range. I'll pop a link to him somewhere in the description too, because he was a cool old miniature, and I just figured Anvil has this wonderful, almost old school sort of sculpting style to some of what they do. So I thought it would be fun, instead of painting him in black, to paint him in blue, as if he were a Mordian officer. So all of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below. Same as always, let's get started. So before we get started painting, I've actually got one of the basic infantry guides that I printed out. When I assemble them on the build plate, put them down, I like to keep them a little bit closer together so that they stay, basically this is a single kit. One of the things that stands out to me straight away is the epaulets are actually cast on the arms now. And if you had fought with those tiny little resin epaulets from the previous dress uniform range, you might know what an improvement that is. They are shaped to the pose that the arm is on. It's perfect. It's a really neat design extra. Now, Anvil Industry, some of you might be looking and thinking, gosh, there's a lot of supports. And I would say it is probably true that Anvil supports their stuff a little more heavily than you might see from most. I kind of like it because the idea there is that anybody's able to slap it on their build plate and get a decent result. You can very easily remove these though. You can either remove them digitally using Mesh Mixer or Blender or something like that. And it's for that reason that I want to show you this quickly, because you can do that. But you can also take advantage of the multi-shell function that Anvil includes in almost all of their recent digital releases. And you'll see this fella here. I'll pop to the side, and I will put a picture up on screen of what this fella looks like naturally. So I've taken the little studs off his shoulders and most of the eagles and stuff off of his uniform. Personally, I just like a slightly cleaner look. The eagle on his hat will be plenty, but yeah, easy as. Took seconds to do, and I will link to the video in the description where I've demonstrated how to do that with Mesh Mixer. Free software, love it. But anyhow, let's get painting now. So this fella here, I have assembled him and then primed him with a spray of premium grey from Vallejo. Any light color is going to do here. You could use ash grey from Army Painter, grey sear, or even a white. It's not going to matter too much. I've chosen grey because it's not going to be quite as bright when we're finished as maybe a white primer would be. So I quite regularly mention when you're painting to start from the lowest possible layer and work your way up, because then every stage after your first is going to be tidying up. So we're going to start from the area we're most likely to make a mess of, and that is his tongue. I'm using here Wyvern Fury, and I do not have to be careful at all. I'll just jam this in his mouth. Yep. Then after that extremely difficult first step, I'm going to use here Jasper skin to base coat his face. Now it's up to you. You could also do his hands with this, but I'm planning to do his hands in gloves, so I'm not too worried. And you'll see straight away why I'm doing his face now. Blorping on the coat, his collar, won't matter. So away we go. Now he looks a little funky with his teeth and what have you all painted in, but we're going to get to that obviously. What I've got now is Brainmatter Beige. And what I'm going to do is use this to base coat the bits that I want to be white. This is not a pure white, obviously, but it gives us a nice, almost creamy sort of base to work off. We'll need 2 coats. You'll see getting up underneath his jacket there can be a little bit tricky, but take your time. this is the reason why we're doing this bit now, so that we can be a little bit messy here. Now on the back of his coat there, I have just applied a third coat of that Brainmatter beige. And there's an important thing I want to touch on really quickly. If you're struggling with a light color like beige or white or something like that, let the first coat dry. The important thing is that if you put down a layer of paint and then give it a couple of seconds and start trying to apply more, what's going to happen is the fresh paint that you're applying is going to seep through, soften the stuff that you've already applied, and start lifting it off. What you'll get then is little nitty-gritty bits of paint that's already dried, and that's where you get some of that awful texture from when some light paints will give you. So make sure, apply one paint, walk away, go make a cup of tea, do something else, and then when it's dry, come back and apply the next one. You'll get a much smoother finish as a result. So next up, we're going to start on the yellow details. Now this might come as a bit of a surprise, being as I just spent all that time talking about working from the bottom up, but given the shape that some of these details are, you'll find it easier to reach the yellow now, and we can, again, tidy up as we go. So this is warped yellow from the army painter, and I realize now I should probably have painted in his trousers first, but oh well. Now, the Mordian miniature, he was always painted as having trousers and uniform jacket in the same color, but there was quite a neat piece of artwork which featured the Mordians with slightly lighter trousers. So I'm using here, this is Runic Cobalt, and I'm going to go ahead and apply this to his trousers. Now while that's drying, I'm going to flip him around and I'll show you why we did the yellow trim first. What I've got is Ultramarine blue, and this is going to be the majority of his jacket and what have you. Now with the raised edge of that trim there, you can just guide the tip of your brush into it and use it to kind of hook it in place as you draw your brush along and get a nice straight edge there. Otherwise, the rest of him is going to be quite simple. So I'm going to blast away, filling in his jacket. Now it is a little bit tricky to get in behind his collar, but I found it was easiest to approach from the top there. There's going to be one or two bits that you can't reach, but also you're not going to see them, so don't worry too much about that. If you are fussed about it, just paint his head separately. I'm going to move on now to any black details, and surprise, surprise, I have matte black for that. Now for the metallic details, I'm going to paint these in two stages. I'm going to start first of all, I've got here gunmetal. This I'm going to use to paint in his armor, his pistol, that sort of thing. And then any decorative parts, I'm going to start with plate mail metal. Now the exception here is going to be his sword, because I do want this to be quite bright and shiny, so I'm going to apply that here as well. Then, to polish off the metalwork, pun completely intended, I've got here weapon bronze. And you could use here maybe true copper if you wanted a darker finish, but I want this to be quite warm, add a bit of life to the color scheme that we've used so far. So I'm going to paint this onto his plasma pistol and onto the sword as well. And then finally, the last of the base coats we're going to apply, we're going to go all the way back to our Wyvern Fury from the very start and paint in the cabling across his chest here. Oh wait, I lied. There is one last base coat, and that is I've got here Woodland Camo. We're going to paint in the ammo box. This, of course, can be any color that you fancy. Now, once all of your base coats are dried and you've gone back and done any bits of tidy up you have to, I certainly did on the blue, what I've done is to mix up here, this is half and half strong tone and Speedpaint Medium. Now, folks quite regularly ask, why use the Speedpaint Medium rather than the wash medium? And the answer is very simple. This flows differently. The wash medium, by contrast, is I find it quite sticky, and it's a little bit trickier to maneuver. Whereas this stuff, as you can see, I just bucket it straight over the top of everything, and it flows more or less instantly where I want it to go. Now, it's important to be thinning down your washes anyway, because if you use this neat, you're going to get a very, very dark finish, and it's going to make everything look almost muddy, which, for our smartly dressed officer, is not what I want. So over the entire miniature here, Let's come back. Once I've done this, give him about half an hour to dry or so. Let's keep him in shot while I do it if I can. And yeah, let's get a look at what he looks like. Now, with a bit of luck, you'll have something that looks like this. And I think that goes to show the reason in why thinning your shades out is a good idea. What I'm going to do now is just a few highlights. And using the Army Painter system, I'm going to stick mostly to the next step up in each of the color triads. So this here is Alpha Blue. And it is just a little bit lighter than the Ultramarine Blue we started with. I'm going to thin this down with just a little bit of water on your palette. As you can see, I don't need to add much to get a bit of definition there. I'm going to concentrate just on folds, creases, and what have you. This is going to look, I would say, quite cartoony by the time I'm finished. But I like the look. So let's get a few of these on them. Now here's something to bear in mind. Because we have thinned our shade, and we haven't massively changed the color of the coat, if you get a big messy splodge of highlight like this, as I have here, what you can do is go back to your Ultramarine Blue. It's not quite the same as just wiping it away, but you can get rid of some of that kludgy highlight just by going back to your base color and deleting it. Now we'll do the same thing for the yellow, and I'm moving up here to Space Dust. Now this is basically the color that Moon Dust in the previous range used to be, except with a slightly less, I don't know, whimsical name. I always liked Moon Dust being a yellowy color, but a lot of folks are like, why isn't it gray? So it's not Moon Dust anymore. It's Space Dust, known for its yellow qualities. Okay, let's go up now to Tourmaline's skin. And what I'm going to do with this is to paint in most of his face and leave just a little bit of that Jasper skin in the recesses that we have shaded. And then to add just a little bit more depth here, we're going to add a little bit of leopard stone skin. This is where we want to highlight bits like the tip of his nose, just the very edges of his cheekbones, and his chin. Now that will make him extremely pale, but that's kind of what I was counting on anyhow. If you wanted to, just take a step down on the color set there, and you'll end up with a slightly warmer skin tone. What I'm going to move to now is Mithril. I'm going to use this to highlight both the armor, the functional metal, and his weapon as well, his sword. Now for the coppery bits, I'm going to use here, this is True Brass, and it is rapidly becoming one of my favorite colors. It's quite similar to Liberator Gold, just a little more silver in its touch, and I really like how it sets off copper and brass and stuff like that. Now with some deep gray, what I'm going to do is to highlight the leather. I recommend don't go nuts with this, because it will very quickly turn what you're painting gray if you apply too much. So just be sparing with this at the corners of any detail. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that there's a little bit of something wet in and around his mouth. I did hit his face with a little bit of light tone, which is an almost sepia kind of wash. I just wanted to bring down some of that skin tone, and I'm quite happy with that. There's not much left to do. I'm actually turning to an older Army Painter paint here. This is Ice Storm from the previous range. I just don't have the next one up in the desaturated blue-grays, which is quite a mouthful. But luckily, Ice Storm is just perfect for what I want to do anyhow. Not going to add much of this. With some white, I'm going to add just a little bit to his collars here. And I'll do in some of his gloves. Now, just a few little blips here. This is Blood Chalice, which is actually quite bright compared to Wyvern Red, but it's going to help sell the rope look here. The last color that I'm going to apply is a tiny wee blip. This is Nuclear. I can never get it out. Goodness me, I overthink it. It's like Benedict Cumberbatch and penguins. Nuclear Sunrise. Nuclear. There we go. Anyway, just a little bit of this over the plasma coils. Some folks will tell you quite stridently that these should be blue, but in reality, if this were a magnetic field propelling ionized plasma, they would be copper. So I'm adding a little bit of warmth there. I think that's going to look just fine. Once that's dry, I'm going to take them outside and varnish them, and then I will pop his base on. The recipe for that will be in the description. So let's get a look at this fella once he's all finished. And so, there at last, our officer is complete. And it was a lot of fun to paint this guy. Going back to a slightly more classic style, classic method, was a lot of fun to go back to my roots, really. You know, just the old simple base coat, shade, and then a couple of highlights. I think it does go a long way to demonstrating what a difference that thinning out your wash or your shade will make. I say it quite regularly, but there it is. You know, the proof is in that pointy little pudding. So again, thanks go out to Anvil Industry for letting me have the STLs a little early. I have backed this one. I actually got one of the early bird slots because that is how keen I am on these guys. I still have a bunch of the resin originals that I need to paint. And yeah, it is I think a truism of 3D printing that the longer you have your printer, the more STLs you collect that, well, gosh, I have a lot to print if I'm ever going to print all of them, let's say. So as well, thank you very much goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, and importantly, resin, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.